Hello, thank you for joining us today and welcome to Live from PON. Today's speaker will be Daniel Shapiro, whose talk is titled, Ahhhhh, How to Negotiate the Non-Negotiable in an Era of Discontent. My name is Susan Hackley and I am delighted to welcome you on behalf of the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. PON is a consortium program of Harvard, MIT, and Tufts universities. This talk will be recorded and it will be posted on the PON website in a few days. We will also be able to share the PowerPoint slides with you. You come from all over the world and we are honored that you have chosen to spend this hour with us. There will be time during the session for discussion. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Thank you to Diane Long and Anna Chang for facilitating that process. Please remain muted throughout the session. That helps reduce background noise. If you have comments, please put those in the chat function. There will be time near the end of the session when the speaker may call on you to ask your question live. Please be prepared to unmute your microphone if called on. Now, I am happy to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Daniel Shapiro. Dan Shapiro teaches negotiation at Harvard College and at Harvard Medical School, where he is Associate Professor of Psychology. He also teaches executive education sessions at the Program on Negotiation, the Harvard Kennedy School, and Harvard Medical School, McLean Hospital. He has served on the faculty at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts and at the Sloan School of Management at MIT. Dan is the author of Negotiating the Non-Negotiable, which Matthew Bishop of the Economist Group called, quite simply, the best book I've ever read on negotiating in situations of extreme conflict. And Dan is co-author with Roger Fisher of Beyond Reason, Using Emotions as You Negotiate. Dan, it's such a pleasure to have you here with Live from PON.
Thank you, Susan. And it is wonderful to be here with everyone. Thank you to the Program on Negotiation for helping to make this happen. And before we move further, I'm going to test my technological skills and try to put my PowerPoint on so all of you can see that. Can you see this now? Susan, does it look, is it there?
Yes.
Perfect, okay. So welcome to all of you here. This is an unbelievable thrill to be in my home here in Massachusetts with nearly 500 people and growing on this call right now, on the Zoom call. We have people from dozens and dozens and dozens of countries. I was just looking at who has appeared. We have people from Italy, from Greece, India, Brazil, Colombia, Japan, Chile, France, Philippines, Canada, Kuwait, Netherlands, South Africa, UK, and on and on. So this really is a thrill to be here with all of you. We have some important global conversations, and this is a global group. My hope is that I'll be presenting for the first portion of our time, and then the second portion of our time together, my hope is that we can have both Q&A and dialogue around that big question: how do we as a global community, a global family, move forward most constructively together? I start with something that happened this week. A day ago, two colleagues and I are trying to look at new ways of trying to understand negotiation, new perspectives, how one can take different perspectives on negotiation. And we had this wonderful opportunity to talk with Byron Lichtenberg, who is an MIT-trained astronaut. So a NASA astronaut, he was also a former fighter pilot and so on. And we asked Byron, what was it like to be up there in the heavens and to see the Earth from way up above? And his response, he said that experience way up in the heavens fundamentally changed him as a person. It changed his identity. He said to be up there in the skies, to see no boundary lines between states, between countries, to experience the Earth as this interconnected system. And what struck me is he said it wasn't just a cognitive shift, a mental shift. He said this was a shift in mind and body, and ultimately in spirit. It was an awakening to the scale of our human interconnection. And as astronauts like to say, we are all in this together. And boy, do we have some serious crises that we need to deal with in our world now together. We have the health crisis with the pandemic, with all of the ramifications, physical, mental, and beyond, that our world is suffering through right now. We have the economic crisis, the uncertainty around markets. And then we have this enduring struggle for social justice, and here in the United States, and certainly in many other parts of the world as well. Each of these burning crises can seem so big, so insurmountable, so intractable, so non-negotiable, that we might want to throw our hands up in the air and go, you know what, it's not even worth it to try to deal with these issues, to negotiate them. And I think there's some truth to that, exasperated feeling, because there are no easy answers to these complex problems, no quick fix, no simple band-aid that we can put on and hope that healing happens magically underneath the covers. These problems are deep, they are global, and they are combustible. And to make this real, just try sitting down with your neighbor today who holds a totally different political perspective than you, and see how long you can last talking and listening and problem solving with that person before you start judging him or her as crazy. And I think that experience, this instinct to judge, to protect our values and our beliefs, our tribal allegiances, note that, because it suggests, at least to me, that we cannot resolve these contemporary crises through rational dialogue alone. What gives these modern crises and the negotiation components of them their emotional charge is that they implicate our identity. They implicate who we are, what we stand for, what we want to fight for, and what we don't choose to fight for. And over the years, working in many different situations of conflict in the Middle East and elsewhere, what I've noticed and observed and ultimately documented is that when your identity feels threatened, when I start mocking implicitly or explicitly your nationality, your race, your ethnicity, something about you, your gender, something that's important to you, all of a sudden, if that happens, we tend to move into this different mindset that I call a tribal mindset. Tribes are beautiful. They are our family. But when I attack your tribe, or when you attack mine, we move into this mindset which has three basic components. First of all, it is adversarial. I'm talking with my neighbor. All of a sudden, we hit upon some uncomfortable political differences. Now it's me versus him or her. It's adversarial. Two, it's self-righteous. In other words, I'm there with my neighbor. I know I am right and correct. Morality and legitimacy are on my side, and you, my neighbor, you're crazy. And three, this mindset is insular. It's a closed system. So I argue and I defend my perspective to no ends, but I close my ears to your perspective. And if one should ask, why is our world so polarized right now? I think this tribal mindset has a lot to do with it. There's no single rational solution to deal with the complex identity-based dynamics that are polarizing much of our world. And once we are in this mindset, suddenly your sweet neighbor with those differing politics becomes your nemesis, your enemy. So how do we break free? How do we break free of this tribal mindset? And this has been something that I've been researching now for close to 30 years, initially in Eastern and Central Europe, right at the turn of communism, in the Middle East and elsewhere. How do we break people free of this tribal mindset? And in the contemporary crises around healthcare and economics and justice, I've built a framework. I call it relational identity theory. And part of that framework illuminates 5 emotional forces, 5 basic things that tend to bring about this tribal mindset, make it worse, tempt us toward it. And if you are aware of these 5 things, I call them the 5 lures of the tribal mind. If you are aware of them, you can start to deal with them differently. You can start to harness the emotional energies of these crises in a more positive direction. And this picture I put together this morning, I was trying to think through how do I describe expediently these 5 lures. You know, they're like big glaciers in the ocean. And the more you are aware of these 5 different forces that are there affecting us in situations of conflict, the more you can work around them, the more you can work through them, the more you can keep dialogue moving in a productive direction. I'm going to walk through each of these 5 lures rather rapidly, only so we have a good amount of time for dialogue ourselves and conversation, because I really do want to hear from you, hear your thoughts. 5 lures, 5 emotional forces. If you're not aware of them, they will pull you toward that tribal mindset. How do you deal with these 5 things? Well, the first of these 5 lures is what I call vertigo. Some of you might be familiar with the medical term vertigo. That's experienced when you're on the top of a building and you look down and the world starts to circle, your mind starts to circle, a dizzying experience. By vertigo, what do I mean? In situations of conflict and crises, it is when you get so consumed in a conflict situation or a crisis situation that you can think of nothing else other than that situation, driven only by your emotions. So it's a myopic experience. You're thinking narrowly, it's not broadly. You're reacting, you're not proactively problem solving. I was talking recently with a group of Israeli and Palestinian officials about this concept. About a week later, I received an email from one of them. And she said in her email, I was there at one of these negotiation tables with someone from the other side. And she said, conversation was nice and lovely at first, but all of a sudden, a little tornado of vertigo started spinning toward me as we started getting into the sensitive topics. And she realized that if she had not been aware of that tornado coming toward her, she would have been overtaken. She might have said something that she later regretted. But instead, in this conversation, the real life conversation, she said in her mind, she asked herself one critical question. Do I really want to go there? Do I really want to get consumed by that vertigo experience or not? In her mind, she said no. And she said it was a much more focused and productive conversation. So 2 big points on vertigo: be aware of it. Call it out in your mind if you start to see that tornado of emotional consumption coming toward you. Take a deep breath, and ask yourself, do you really want to go there? Vertigo. The second, and by the way, one last point, vertigo isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes you might want to go there, but sometimes without being proactive, it's going to cost you more. Second, the second of these more complex psychological dynamics that move us toward divisive thinking is the repetition compulsion. This is a concept initially conceived of by Sigmund Freud. It has a lot of complexity to it, but in its simplest form, it is the notion that we as human beings tend to repeat the same dysfunctional patterns of behavior again and again and again and again, even though we know we shouldn't. When our session began today, for those of you who arrived a little earlier, you heard one of my favorite old school hip hop songs, which is Fight the Power by the rap group Public Enemy. And this song, Fight the Power, was the theme song, the major song of a 1989 movie called Do the Right Thing by Spike Lee. I recently rewatched that movie last week with my children because it's a powerful depiction of race relations and some of the complexities. And what struck me most, truly, hauntingly, just not a pleasant feeling at all, was how what was happening in that video is so similar to what is happening today in terms of race relations. You know, what has really changed? Has progress actually moved forward? And my point here is that the repetition compulsion is something that we individually might do, repeating the same problematic patterns with a loved one, and it's also something that societies get stuck in as well. Repeating the same problematic dynamics and patterns over and over again, in part because change feels so uncomfortable. Let's move on. The third of these lures, these things that move us toward that tribal mindset, taboos. Taboos are social prohibitions. They are those things you are not supposed to say, the things you're not supposed to do, the way you're not supposed to be. And some taboos are good. You know, a taboo on domestic abuse, this is a good thing. You know, on the other hand, some taboos are very problematic. How, in my work in the Middle East with Israelis and Palestinians, if there is a taboo on communicating with somebody from the other side, if that is looked upon as a form of betrayal, if it's looked upon as a form of betrayal for a Republican or Democrat to simply talk to somebody from the other side and try to problem solve common challenges, if that's a taboo, how do we as a society move forward? So there's some social prohibitions that I think work, taboos that work quite against our goals of cooperation, of working together toward the civic good, the common good. Let's go to the fourth. The fourth of these lures is what I call an assault on the sacred. The big idea here, respect the sacred. It doesn't mean you need to agree with anybody's sacred, but respect it, don't assault it if you want cooperation. What do I mean by the sacred? The sacred is that which we perceive to be imbued with divine significance. So in other words, it doesn't have to be a deity, a god, or a set of gods. It can be a person, a place, a thing, an ideology, a group. I think, what do you hold sacred in your own life? Your children, your parents, those relationships. For some of you, there might be a certain religion or ideology or God. And the moment that somebody else slanders that, intentionally or not, all of a sudden that's an assault. And very quickly, what was a potentially good working relationship turns now into me versus you, us versus them. You know, what's the sacred in the United States to the Democrats, to the Republicans? What values? Criticizing Trump's policies generally, as an example, is very different than criticizing his daughter, which I'd imagine might feel much more like an assault on the sacred to him. In today's world where politics is so taken over in ways that we haven't seen in quite some time, political parties themselves now have become much more of a sacred entity. You criticize my political party, that tribe, you have now assaulted my sacred, and you will suffer. We're now in the tribes effect, that tribal mindset. So if you want to create an atmosphere that fosters cooperation, acknowledge that which others hold as sacred. It does not mean you agree with it, but you certainly can acknowledge it. And fifth, the fifth of these lures is of a different kind. The first four lures, the vertigo, repetition, compulsion, taboos, the sacred, these things are complex. They often work under the radar screen in our unconscious worlds of interaction. The fifth of these lores, identity politics, is much more of a purposeful or often intentional tool to divide people. Identity politics, as I define it, is a little bit different than how it is often used in popular culture. What I mean by identity politics, it is the use of identity to advance a political purpose. So I'm going to try and bring us together under some roof or definition of identity, some umbrella. I'm going to bring us together to try to move all of you with me towards some political goal. And in times of crisis, it's so easy for people to misuse identity politics. So in other words, to treat identity negatively, to define us as a group as in opposition to another group. It's what researchers call negative identity. I am who I am because I am not you. And I think the way around this in our current situation of crisis is to bring about really a different mindset, which I call the civic mindset. Yes, we can have our tribal systems, our tribal beliefs, that's okay, as long as there is this overarching sense of identity that holds us all together in the spirit of communityness. You know, we're connected through community. A civic mind, in contrast to the other form of identity politics, which really tribalizes us. It cuts us into pieces, into silos and so on. I think it's the enlightened media. Maybe they don't make as much money, but they're the ones who are calling attention to the many ways that people are working together around the world, around issues of this pandemic, the scientific communities, the academic communities, the local communities, dealing with the economy, with issues of social justice and so on. So anyway, this was a quick walk through these 5 concepts that tend to often divide us in situations of crisis and conflict. And just to summarize then, how do we break free of this tribal mindset? Well, first of all, stop vertigo. Notice if that tornado is coming towards you and stop it. Ask yourself, what's my purpose? Is vertigo going to feed my purpose? 2, resist that pull to repeat the same old dysfunctional behaviors that you always have, that we always have. 3, discuss taboos. The verb I'm not sure is the right one, but become aware of taboos and decide how do you want to deal with the taboos that might be constraining more cooperative behavior. Maybe you can't talk to your neighbor, it's too risky. Maybe you don't want to talk to your neighbor about politics, but who can you? So that you can start to move beyond your own myopic tribal perspectives on particular issues. 4th, respect the sacred, be careful not to assault it if you want to move toward cooperation. And 5th, use identity politics to unify. You know, and here I think about someone like the larger than life heroic character of Nelson Mandela, who did not, after 27 years in prisons, he didn't suddenly say, well, let's throw one whole group of people into the prisons now, not my own people. He said, no, we are bigger than that. It is not about black or white. It is all of us, or colored. It is about all of us working together, Ubuntu, the spirit of togetherness that ultimately moved that society forward. So those are the big ideas. How do you break free of the tribal mindset? These are 5 deeper things. This is not to say that one should not be rationally, strategically thinking about negotiation, but what I am trying to say is that if you only focus on this rational dimension, society is never truly going to move forward. At least that's my belief. Anyway, let me now turn it over to Diane, who is going to help my inept technical self with the facilitation of our conversation. Hi, Diane.
Hi, thank you, Dan. Our first question comes from Mark Patterson, and we're going to ask Mark to unmute himself and ask his question live.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering, Daniel, thank you for, I know, trying to run down such a deep concept so quickly, but I was a little bit unsure as to the distinguishing concept between taboos and sacred, understanding that everybody has their own sacred and their own taboo. How do you know the difference? It's kind of a perspective thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, those two concepts and even a lot of the research literature, they're often blended together. I differentiate them for a couple of reasons. One's practical. Let me think about the work with the Israelis and Palestinians, again, that there are certain conversations that just feel so very taboo to deal with. They may not be about something that is sacred, but it is something that is deeply uncomfortable to talk about, or that some source of power within one of those communities sort of, suggests implicitly shouldn't be discussed. So taboos to me are, my mother-in-law, I thought, put it very well when she said taboos, they're the big no-nos. The things you're not supposed to say or do or talk about. When it comes to the sacred, my real interest here, even in my book, was on the question of how, can you negotiate the sacred? It has to do with taboos, but how do you negotiate that which is arguably non-negotiable? And so that fourth one you see there on your screen initially came about with that question in my mind. I think the strategies for dealing specifically with taboos may be a little bit different than the strategies for dealing with the sacred. With taboos, for example, the first question that one might want to ask is, how to, if this taboo is causing, if it's an impediment to our conversation, to cooperation, how do I deal with it? One, maybe I don't. I suffer with that taboo. Two, I might chisel away at the taboo very gently. I don't raise the issues directly, but in a side sort of way, privately with you, Mark, offline. And then the third way of dealing with those taboo issues was the Mandela way. You're just coming in a very powerful way, you're tearing down those walls. Those are strategies for dealing with taboos. When it comes to the sacred, around something, let's say, like the the utterly complex Israeli-Palestinian conflict, how can you ever negotiate issues such as Jerusalem? And I think a part of the answer is to try to understand the language of the sacred that the other speaks, and potentially in an with authenticity, to express, really to appreciate where they are coming from, what their sacred values and narrative is, and to walk in a problem-solving direction within that broader landscape. Anyway, that's just an example of how one might think through respecting the sacred. That's probably a little bit different than the strategies for dealing with the taboo. At the end of the day, though, I do absolutely agree with you. These concepts share a lot in common.
Thank you. Yeah, so sacred is not necessarily not talkable. It's just one you have to explore in a sensitive way.
You said that much more succinctly than I did. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yes, no, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, at the same time, the sacred often has an aura of taboo about it. Blasphemy, as an example.
Okay, Dan, so we have a question from Jose Escobar. Jose, would you please unmute your mic?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, and you know what? I forgot to ask the first person, Mark, but Jose, where are you based?
Okay, well, first of all, it's Jose Francisco Escobar, and I go by Francisco because I'm Joe number 4 in my family.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
In honor of the Holy Family.
Yes.
I've got Joseph in the name. So anyway, I'm going to paraphrase my question. Fantastic presentation, by the way, Mr. Shapiro, or Dr. Shapiro.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Stuart Diamond?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. And I believe, I work in the marketing services arena. I'm based in Dallas, Texas. Mm-hmm. I've been a consultant for 17 years, and I profess his book. I use it a lot in my presentations. And my question to you is this. You've approached negotiations from a very psychological and emotional aspect. And as does Dr. Diamond on the emotional front and the psychological front. But you come at it from clearly different ways. I mean, his book, Getting More, is all about getting more and not necessarily the other side getting less. So I just want to understand, do you feel like your perspective reaches the same ultimate objective or something else?
No, it's a great question. And thank you, Francisco. I would probably subscribe to everything, if not almost everything, that Stuart Diamond subscribes to in his book. I see there being, as I understand it, his focus is primarily on negotiation. In a sense, everything, like the titles to this talk are a bit misleading because I'm really talking about conflict today. And I see there being 3 layers, 3 dimensions to how you can most effectively deal with a complex conflict. And this is true in negotiation as well, but layer 1 is rational. So in the rational approach to negotiation, Stuart Diamond's book, or the program on negotiations, Getting to Yes genre of books, those books are all about rational problem solving. I have my interests, you have your interests. Let's look beneath the positions to the underlying interests and try to invent some options for mutual gains. It's a beautiful process. It is essential to any crisis of today. And that's one dimension of conflict and of negotiation. Beneath that dimension is this whole emotional dimension to negotiation. How do I deal, so if you and you said, Francisco, you said you're in sales, is that right?
No, I do marriage counseling in the advertising industry, which is marriage counseling between businesses. So I try to keep clients and their agencies and service providers together and working optimally.
Great. No, so I mean, their problem solving is one layer to helping groups work most effectively together. At the same time, as I'm sure you've experienced as much as anybody through that work, often the problem is not a rational problem. Often it's that, you know what, you just walked into this meeting and you demeaned my status. I don't like you anymore. I don't want to work with you. Or I have excluded you from an important meeting and now you don't like me. So there's this emotional dimension that often becomes a barrier to effective negotiation, and it also can be an asset. How can we try to build more affiliation, respect people's status so that they're working side by side together? Talk today is going one layer deeper. And it's saying beneath the rational, beneath the emotional, is this realm called identity. And on issues of social justice, around issues related to the pandemic, who's going to get what sorts of supplies first and second and third, to my own sense of things, from reading the papers and so on, is that this is not just a rational problem. This is not just an emotional problem, but identity is at core at play here. And if identity goes amok, in other words, if identity becomes, a source of divisiveness rather than a source of interconnection, boy, we're in trouble. Like these issues, I'm thinking of the materials for healthcare providers. Think how many people need to be involved in those kinds of things. You have the manufacturers, you have the distributors, you have the suppliers, you have the state governments, the local governments, the national governments, you have the international community. All of these stakeholders are there, each subscribing to a particular identity. We can try and just problem solve at this, cerebral level, but my sense is that we're not going to fix the long-term systemic issues if we don't move to the emotional, if we don't deal with these deeper identity barriers and turn them into something more of a facilitator of good conversation, value maximizing conversation.
If I might just comment on that fantastic answer. I really think that everybody or anybody that is aware of themselves has been really, in one form or fashion, forced to confront their identity through this because of the fact that we're obviously we all identify with our family, but now we're completely surrounded by them. And whatever our professional challenges might be, I just think it's, the Zoom world has equalized everybody by giving them all the same amount of real estate. Maybe not the same voice, but there's just been a real interesting impact to identity and search for identity through what we've been going on, with not just the COVID, but the other socioeconomic things that have happened. So thank you very much. This has been outstanding.
No, well, thank you. And I shouldn't talk more. We should leave room for questions, but just one final thought. And this is dangerous to say, this is taboo, because I am right here in my own home right now, in my home office with my wife, probably right outside the door, and my kids. But I think about something like marriage. You had mentioned the marriage of businesses. And you can get a couple or two businesses who have problems, and they can resolve their financial differences. Or with my wife and I, we might figure out a way to, decide what kind of takeout are we going to get tonight. She wants one, I want another. We might find, we might have a little conflict and we figure it out. But if we're only relying on problem solving and the deeper patterns of our relationship are not addressed and we're not working through them, we can rightly expect and predict to have another conflict just as bad or worse tomorrow and the next day. So my point ultimately is to say the rational is important, but if you don't look more deeply at some of these deeper patterns, our repetition compulsions, the identity politics that we use or misuse, we're just going to repeat the same, value minimizing, value deficient processes and outcomes that we have 100 times before. Diane.
Okay, are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay. So we have a question from Paula Gotlove. Paula, would you please unmute your mic?
Hi, it's wonderful to see you, Dan, and I really, really appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
As you were talking about discussing the taboos, I'm reminded of the book by Greenwald and Zeitlin. This is back, I think, 1990, so it's quite a while ago. It was called No Reason to Talk About It.
Huh.
Families Confront the Nuclear Taboo. And the important key, this was back when the Physicians for Social Responsibility and the international physicians were looking at how to stop the nuclear arms race and prevent nuclear war. And the important key here was that the book recognized that a taboo existed and modeled how parents could talk to their children about the taboo subject of nuclear war. And we're seeing this kind of lifting the taboo about talking about racism right now, just the beginning of this. And I'm just wondering if you have any models you could show us or draw our attention to around lifting the taboo to address collaborative problem solving around the climate crisis, the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, and in particular, how we're going to look at the upcoming election, where identity has been used to divide, and discussing the taboo is going to be critical.
Paula, I'm going to turn it back to you. Since for all of you on this call, just to make this explicit, Paula's done an incredible amount of work in the realm of conflict resolution. What's your answer to that question?
Well, I'm struggling with this because the divide is growing bigger and bigger. There's a piece in today's New York Times about the misinformation and the fake news that's creating the Antifa as the enemy of the Republic, and I'm really struggling. So people are very emotionally charged about all of this, and we've become more and more divided, and the discussions have become more and more taboo.
Yeah. I mean, a couple thoughts. One, in my book, there's a chapter on how one can think through taboos and deal with taboos. One of the concepts there, I take from the research talking about the creation, not of a safe space, but of a brave space. A safe space is a place where anybody can talk if they want to and share their thoughts, but anybody can also be quiet if they prefer not to share their perspectives. One of the problems of a safe space is that the dominants in a society then have the right to be quiet. And a lot of the tax on issue discussion falls on the non-dominant parties in a dialogue group. So a brave space, on the other hand, says, no, you're coming into this group and you're going to take a risk. You are going to share something about who you are, what you believe in, and yeah, some others might disagree with you. It might cause some friction, and that's okay. Earlier, I mentioned that concept of this concept I've been building that I call it the civic mindset. I was struggling for quite some time. What is the mindset that's the opposite of the tribal mindset in modern society? And at first, it seemed like the word I was moving toward was civil mindset. But civil conversation to me seems too civil. And I think it's a little bit unrealistic in the realm of politics as well. I think we do want respect in conversations, but too much respect ultimately leads to too much inhibition. How can we have a real conversation with some guardrails so that nobody, really emotionally stabs anybody else, but create a space for brave conversations, a brave space. I think we have 500 people on this call right now. If each one of you on this call works with your own local institution around the world and says, you know what, let's put together a dialogue group on how I'm talking about some of those things that might typically be non-discussable. To talk about the taboo. Find a good facilitator, get that thing going. I have.
Can I say one more thing, Dan?
Sure, please.
And I want to pick up on that and say that this takes a new concept of leadership. Leadership that picks up on a civic mindset rather than an identity mindset. And I think it was demonstrated by Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, when she took on the COVID crisis, and she said, we are a community of 5 million strong, and together we are going to address this crisis. So I think it's a question of modeling a civic mindset leadership. And as you say, we can all do that. So I really thank you for your contribution to this important work. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I agree with you completely. There is that element of leadership. I also think the nature of leadership in today's world has shifted. There is obviously the importance of the state leadership. At the same time, there's such a flattening that anybody really can do something. We have the internet and the power of the internet for many people in the world. I think of it, some of my students, I got an email last week from one of my students. She's a senior at Harvard College, and she said, would you be willing to join this past Saturday to speak with a group of facilitators that I've put together to talk about issues of racial justice? And I said, well, what auspices, what institution are you running this out of? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, is it through Harvard or this? And she says, no, we're just doing this because we believe in it. And she sends me this 50-page curriculum that she built. She had on they have, what was it, over 300 or 400 people sign up for this online conversation. All of these people she's training as facilitators to help facilitate small group dialogue. She wasn't waiting for, for the president of a country or the president of a university or the president of any organization to say, do this. She did it. And I think if we're going to break some of these taboos to improve conversation and cooperation within society, to some extent, I think that's what it takes, is this proactive sense. You have power. We all have power. Find that power that you do have and use it.
Okay, Dan, we have a question now from Yuri Mantilla. Yuri, are you ready?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. A great lecture. My question regards indigenous communities. In Latin American countries, as you may know, there is a structural racial bias that dehumanizes indigenous people. Yeah. How can political, economic, other types of negotiations between the predominant Hispanic elites in Latin America with indigenous communities, how they can be successful? Yeah. Considering the inherent, there is this inherent asymmetry of power, yep. And there is a widespread conscious and subconscious biases against the indigenous communities. Right now, in countries such as Bolivia, there's still the possibility of a civil war if they don't go to elections soon. Yeah. As you may know, that's one of the around 45% of the population is indigenous. Yet it seems that these taboo issues, are very hard to address. So how can and I think those great ideas of movements in the internet that take initiatives for reconciliation that you just mentioned, I think they are amazing. Civil society trying to do things that can prevent violence. How do you see this issue of indigenous communities, and what can be done, to prevent even civil wars? I would say I'm afraid that in countries such as Bolivia and others.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's an extremely important question. I think there's a danger that one could listen to everything that at least I've talked about today and say, boy, that's naive. You in your place of privilege, offering all these ideas, well, what do you do with those who are disenfranchised within a particular society? Three thoughts offhand. I'm sure the other people on this call would have many more and probably much better ideas than myself. One, education. To the extent that one can educate all of society, or at least as many people in society as possible, trying to deconstruct some of those stereotypes that people might have about indigenous populations, I think that's critical. Education may not, because of issues of control, make it into state-run formal systems of education, but how might systems of processes of education be implemented throughout the society nonetheless, more informally? That's one piece. Two, it's really hard to go it alone, to be alone. A single person may have some sort of power, but much more power when there is a coalition. And so my second point on how to build more power in a system like what you're talking about would be to try to very strategically map out who are some of the dominant stakeholders, people who hold power within society, not just state organizations, but much beyond that, within the region, who might hold some power that could be useful to help level the playing field, and in the international spectrum, where are the sources of power? If you have a mission, if you have a purpose for equality, very intentionally, very strategically, start to build those coalitions. Who should you connect with first? Who will connect you with person number 2, organization number 2 and 3 and 4, and before you know it, you are no longer just a small community that is systematically disempowered, but now you've built the power, and you're going to have much more of, presumably, an ear on the side of some of these governments because you have that much more power. Third, and this may or may not work, but just to offer this, I am a real believer in the power of human relationships, of affiliation, of human connection. To the extent that some of the leadership from an indigenous group can build a relationship, an authentic relationship with one or two of the official decision makers, you at least have an ear. Someone who is there who can listen, offer feedback, and hopefully help you to navigate more effectively towards your goals. Those are 3 ideas. I think the issue you're raising is really important. How does one negotiate the non-negotiable from a place of perceived or real disempowerment? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Diane, I think we're back to you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, one of our participants doesn't have a mic, so she asked if I would read her question for her.
Sure.
This will make sense to you. The participant's name is Rosa Abdelnoir.
Okay.
She asks, can you share a technique to handle parties' emotions in a mediation session, like affect labeling or another?
Hold on, I'm writing it down. In a mediation, so how to handle parties' emotions in a mediation setting. You know, there's a little framework that my colleague Roger Fisher and I developed many years back in the early 2000s. We put it together in a book called Beyond Reason, and the framework is called the Core Concerns Framework. Basically 5 tools to deal with the emotional sides of mediation, of negotiation. And our idea was, rather than a mediator trying to figure out each and every emotion that each disputant is feeling, which can be overwhelming, turn your attention to 5 basic human motivations that are driving each of those parties there, and that probably are driving your emotions too. Let me share them really quickly with you. The first of them is appreciation, because we all want it, we all need it. You know, every one of us on this earth wants to feel heard and understood and valued. And the moment that each party in that negotiation, in that mediation, feels unappreciated, now their emotions are moving in a different direction. It's negative, not positive. The second of these core concerns is autonomy. The freedom to make decisions without somebody else telling you what to think or feel. In almost any dispute, either side feels their autonomy being bashed by the other. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me how to feel. Autonomy. So sensitivity to that is useful. And the big idea here, have the parties separate the process of inventing ideas to deal with their differences from the process of committing to those differences, to some sort of outcome. In the realm of inventing ideas, they're free. Their autonomy is free to be creative. And they can slowly move toward some sort of anchoring of their autonomy. The third of these core concerns that is very active in mediation is affiliation, the emotional connection between people. How do you help those two parties sitting there at the negotiation or mediation table? How do you help them see the issue as not each other? The problem is not each other, but the problem, it's a shared problem. Then they're sitting side by side dealing with that same problem together. The words you use can be tremendously important in building a more effective affiliation. I was recently watching a mediator, a young, fairly novice mediator with a couple in a divorce mediation. And he starts off and says, so what brought you both to divorce? Ooh, that is not the kind of question that is going to bring about affiliation. You know, it's just the opposite. It's going to bring about the tribal mindset. Instead, that same novice mediator could have asked, what brought you both here today? You know, how can you envision yourselves working and cooperating most effectively? That different question reframes their entire relationship between these two. Affiliation, positive emotions, not negative. The fourth of these core concerns is status. Another big deal in mediation, negotiation. You know, you don't want me to put you down and I don't want you to put me down. And just the opposite, what might you say or do as a mediator to help each side feel acknowledged for their areas of status? And the fifth of these core concerns is role. What role is each of these two parties playing in this mediation? And is it helpful? Are they playing the role of adversaries as domineering jerks? Or are they playing the role of problem solvers? And what can you say as the mediator to help them walk into the role of problem solvers? Look, we could spend the next 5 years, I'm sure you could, yelling and screaming at each other. My thought was today, we might have both of you adopt the role of problem solvers and try and figure out how to deal with the home, the kids, and so on. 5 core concerns, a simple way to try and deal with a lot of complex emotions. And Diane, let me throw it back to you.
Okay, I think we have so many amazing, great questions, and I promised a couple of people already, and I can't get to them all. So one of them I'm going to read out because this person, again, does not have a mic. It's from Scott Tillman. And he says, Professor Shapiro, I'm a police officer with a front row seat to this era of discontent. Have any wisdom specifically for people in my line of work as we work to resolve this societal conflict?
Yes. I mean, that is a critical question that this is my take, my sense, is it goes back to the civic mindset that, let me focus on the United States. For the United States as a system, as a society to move forward, we all need to work together. And this is not a criticism of anybody. This is just a forward-looking, purpose-driven statement. How can we most effectively work together? And there I would draw upon a couple of concepts that I would keep in mind. One is affiliation. How can we build communities where everybody feels interconnected? One thing, as I wish we could talk now, Scott, because I'd love to hear your perspectives on this rather than have this be a one-way dialogue myself. But one thing that I found to be very useful is consultation, asking advice. So rather than either side in a difficult conflict situation only throwing accusations at the other, how might we create environments for real conversation, productive problem solving to happen? Getting police departments, as I know some do, police departments and police officers to sit down with local communities, to have the local communities, the police officers and government officials all sitting down together saying, okay, let's lay out what the problems are. What are the 5 or 10 major problems and which 3 do we want to start to tackle? Let us as a community now figure out what are some ways that we as a community can move forward. And nobody's judging these ideas as good or bad yet. Once again, it's in this realm of just inventing ideas that might be useful. So there's this consultative space, this open space where we are all in this together as part of this civic community. And within that space, my hope is that some better ideas can be generated, how to deal with the complex, systemic elements that are at play. So, just to summarize that point and to really think it out loud in my own head, it is about us as a community, a broader community, working most effectively together. And within that community, having some processes where we all can contribute to the problem solving in a way that is fair, that holds to certain criteria that everybody buys into. That is, my thought is, boy, I'm looking at our clock. We could have and should, I'm sure, have many more dialogues about that important question because it's complicated. I don't think there's an easy answer, but I do think there are some ways to move forward out there.
Dan?
Yes.
Thank you everyone so much for being part of this talk. And Dan, thank you for sharing your wisdom. This is also relevant to what's happening around the world, certainly to us in the United States. I'd like to thank everyone who participated on behalf of the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. Please return to our website from time to time to see other events. Read lots of information we have there that's available for free. Thank you so much. We wish you all well. Goodbye.
Thank you.